Welcome back to HQ Spotlight here on CBS Sports Network. The clock continues to tick as we wait for the NFL draft to get underway out in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Tomorrow we'll hear 32 names called across the first round, 257 as the weekend progresses. No one keeping a closer eye on the talent than our draft expert, Ryan Wilson, as you take a look at his final big board, starting with prospects 1 through 10. Wilson's been charting these players since even before the season began. I feel like Ryan Wilson eats, sleeps, and breathes the NFL draft as you look at his final top 10 big board prospects. We've seen some movers and shakers, though, as this process goes along. So let's welcome in with the First Pick podcast host, Ryan Wilson, who's taking a break from his war room a little bit. This background looks a little bit different, Ryan. So let's get it going here as we start out with your 1 through 10 prospects. We're going to pick up the conversation at that number 4 spot. That's where we find Jalen Walker. He has actually moved up 13 spots since the last time we talked about your big board. What changed your perspective about the Butkus Award winner?
Hey, Haley, good to see you. I feel like that countdown clock we just saw, I need that digitally imposed on like a sweatshirt, and it just changes as I walk down the street. Absolutely, but we're almost home, so there's that. So Jalen Walker, here's the thing about Jalen Walker. He played off-ball linebacker at Georgia. He can play also on the edge, which he did at Georgia, and he did it at a high level. And as coaches got involved in the process, the scouts have been doing it for years now with these college kids. But after this NFL season, they fell in love with Jalen Walker, and there's a real push for him. He could be a top 10 pick. It's going to be close depending on how some of these other players go ahead of him position-wise. But there are teams that are really high on Jalen Walker. 10, 11, even 8 where the Carolina Panthers currently sit. They could be in on Jalen Walker there as well. So that's part of the reason I moved him up. He was so much fun to watch. One of the reasons I had him a little lower in my previous big board is just the position he played, whether he was going to be off ball, which is a position that isn't quite as valuable as edge rush. He can do both, and I think he brings that ability to the next level. It just depends on whether the scheme he goes to, how he's best utilized. But that's the reason. The athleticism, he's great off the field. He's going to be a great teammate. That's why he moved up.
Yeah, 11.5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss, and you actually have him mocked to go number 8 at the Panthers in your most recent mock draft. Most of your CBS Sports coworkers agree with you as well at that point. If we move on down your board, taking a look here at your prospects 11 through 20, we're going to focus in on Will Campbell, the offensive tackle out of LSU. If your projection holds here, which we see him at 16, Ryan, you have him mocked at 4 to go to the Patriots. Campbell would be just the second LSU offensive lineman taken in the first round of the Common Draft era. What jumps out to you about him at 16 on your big board?
Yeah, so he's my offensive tackle 3, but he is the first offensive tackle off the board in the mock draft you just referred to, and that's because he is the most ready to play of the offensive linemen in this draft class, offensive tackles in particular. He started for LSU as a freshman. He's played for 3 years there. He's played at a high level against some of the best players in the SEC and in college football, a lot of whom have graduated to the NFL as well. I just think he's the most NFL ready. I think Kelvin Banks Jr. is a little longer, a little more athletic. I think Armand Membu, who plays right tackle, is a better prospect long-term in terms of the athleticism, but I think that Will Campbell is ready to go right now. The issue, and part of the reason I've always had him around this range, is his arm length isn't ideal, quotation marks, for an offensive tackle in the NFL. But no one, as Will Campbell pointed out, was complaining about that when he was dominating in the last 3 years. It wasn't until the Combine where someone had some comments on that. So that's the only reservation physically in terms of projecting going forward. But I think he is not only a first-round pick, but I think number 4 feels like the landing spot for him with the New England Patriots.
Yeah, it seems like a good fit, especially when you think about the number one thing we've been talking about with the Patriots is getting a solid offensive lineman there to protect Drake May. Let's take a look at your prospects 21 through 30, Ryan. Shadur Sanders on this list. When we first started this process, he was a surefire first-round pick, a top 3 pick even when we talk about him with the Giants and the Browns both needing quarterbacks, but a lot has changed since that point, Ryan. We're hearing some reports about Shadur maybe not performing the best in those interviews. How much stock do you put in those conversations as we look at him at number 25 here on your big board?
I mean, it weighs a little bit, but you talk to some teams that said he was fine and other teams that weren't quite as impressed. And I think it comes down to what you're looking for. And there's no real secrets to Shadur left. We know who he is. We've been following him since he was at Jackson State when he was a freshman and played the entirety of those 4 years, the last 2 at Colorado. But I think 25 is right around the range he's going to come off the board. So this feels about right. 21 to the Steelers feels like the natural landing spot. I know that the Steelers like him, and they will give serious consideration to taking him there should he be available. I don't think the Saints at 9 are going to take a quarterback, so there's a real possibility that he slips between 9 and 21 because no team needs a quarterback between there. The only thing I would point out, Haley, and this is just a little fun story I've been telling myself, the Browns take Travis Hunter at 2, and then they trade back up to pick 20, and they leapfrog the Steelers and get Shedeur there. Because one of the talking points is that, well, what is Shedeur going to look like if he doesn't have Travis Hunter? Well, let's not have to ask that question. Let's just get him on the same team going forward. But I think this is the range he comes off. And if somehow, Haley, he gets past 21, don't be surprised if the Browns at 33 or the Giants at 34 or the Saints at 40 perhaps try to make a move back into the first round to grab him.
I am so glad that we have you on this program to navigate all of the things that we're following and these storylines as they change with the prospects. Even just a day before we're expected to hear Shedeur's name be called at some point. Let's move along, though, on this list. Ryan, one of my first assignments, actually, when I moved to South Florida, originally working in local news, was actually covering the signing day of Shemar Stewart, who's a local talent down in South Florida. And there was a lot of excitement. The U fans were definitely disappointed that he went on to Texas A&M instead. But you fast forward, and we see him on your list falling 14 spots. And instead, it's the edge rusher, Donovan Ezeraku, moving up 15 places. Talk us through the movement here with those two guys in particular.
Yeah, Haley, A+ on the Donovan Ezeraku pronunciation, so you get a gold star for that, no doubt about it.
Practice
a
lot,
Shemar
Ryan.
Stewart thing is interesting, right? Because he is 6'4", 285. He ran a 4.59, but you sort of touched on it. The production wasn't there at Texas A&M, and teams have real questions about that. And I do know for a fact that teams are frustrated that he didn't work out position-specific drills during the pre-draft process. And maybe that was the bad advice of agents, or maybe it was something else. But teams took notice, and they're frustrated with not knowing exactly who Shemar can be, because productivity-wise, it wasn't there. Physically, that's the guy you build in the lab to be that edge rusher. There's a real possibility that he could slip out of the first round because of some of those frustrations that I talked about and the lack of production. Meanwhile, Donovan Ezeraku, I believe he had 16 sacks last year at BC, and my concern with him over the first month of the season was that he was a hair-on-fire pass rusher, no doubt about it. He was winning consistently. He wasn't as good against the run, but he improved over the second half of the season, got better as a run defender, and that's something you can obviously get better at. He's slightly undersized. I say slightly because he's a shade under 250, but he plays certainly much stronger than that. And there's a real possibility that he goes in the first round and certainly has a chance to get drafted before Shemar Stewart, even though Shemar outweighs him by a good 35, 40 pounds.
You were right there when it came to the sacks. He had 16 and a half, which was tied for the most in Boston College history. So we'll give you an A+ for the effort there. You were right there on the margin. Let's look at your board from 41 to 50, and we are going to point our attention to Omarion Hampton, with the running back conversations just been dominated, especially as of late, by Ashton Jeanty. We've kind of seen Hampton maybe slide under the radar a little bit, but when you look at his numbers, Ryan, 1,222 rushing yards after contact. That number is second only to Ashton Jeanty. You partner that with a sub 4.5 40, and it kind of sounds like he could be a steal, Ryan.
Yeah, he's going to be gone long before this, and the young man right below him, Donovan Jackson, has a chance to be a first-round pick as well. Something to keep in mind tomorrow, Haley, and this is something to look out for. Pick 20, the Denver Broncos currently are situated there, and I've heard, love Ashton Jeanty. I don't think they could afford to trade up to get him because it'd have to be inside the top 10. But not so bad consolation prize would be Omarion Hampton, because while I have him at 42, in part because of the position he plays, in part because his running back class is so deep, he could go 20, and I wouldn't even bat an eye at it. He, as you mentioned, had a fantastic season, and he has track speed, and he's 220. You just saw here between the tackles. I mean, there's not even anyone else in the screen. That's how fast he is. He has the ability to catch out of the backfield and can block as well. All things that you would consider Sean Payton loving behind Bo Nix to help that second-year quarterback. So 42, yes, more likely to go closer to pick 20, I think, if the Denver Broncos have anything to say about it.
He's the only player in FBS with over 1,500 rushing yards and more than 15 rushing yards in each of the last two seasons. So you talk about a guy, if you can't get Jeanty, this seems like a pretty good substitution. And I hate even calling him a substitution. These guys really do make a difference. Let's go back to your big board and back to the big men as we look at your prospects here in the 50s. We're going to focus on Josh Conerly here on Spotlight. Conerly had some interesting draft prep experience, though, Ryan, and I hope you can speak to this. He went viral, if you remember, for that bad rep at the Senior Bowl. He was knocked to the ground by Mike Green. How has he improved since that rep? Because he talked about it being a learning experience. He said, everyone gets got, and I got, simple as that. How do you work through that when that lives on the internet?
Yeah, and that's the exact way you have to approach it for Josh Connolly Jr. A couple things to consider. Haley and our buddy Rick Spielman pointed this out to me at the time. He said Josh Connolly plays the left tackle. That's what he did at Oregon. He was taking a right tackle rep in a one-on-one drill, which historically benefits the defensive ends and edge rushers. And he got to his point. That does not affect his draft stock whatsoever. It does. He got better, by the way, throughout the week, playing on the right side, which he had never done before. And the great thing about Josh Connolly is that he's just scratching the surface. He's insanely athletic for his size or anyone's size. And I don't love him as much as some teams, but I talk to teams that think he's a first-round pick, and he could go in the top 32. I just think the lack of experience is what had me push him down the board a little bit. I wouldn't want him to start day one, but year two, he could be lights out from year 2 to year 10 if he gets to the right place and develops like we think he can. I just had him pushed down a little bit because of the lack of experience, but athletically, physically, he can do everything you want a left tackle or a right tackle to do. And I don't hold that rep against him. I think it shows, as you noted, the way he responded to it, that he can come back from adversity. And the NFL, by the way, is one big adversity after the next, and you have to having to be able to overcome that.
That's what I was going to say. We talked about that at the top of the show, those intangibles that you can't coach for these players. He finished that quote by saying, no matter what, you have to get back up and keep fighting. So I think he's in a good place with that mentality. Let's talk about wide receivers, Ryan. It has been a wild offseason for Isaiah Bond. He talked a lot of noise about breaking that 40 record at the Combine, and then he didn't. And then on top of that, you partner it with some of the off-the-field issues that he's having. And, you know, this is one of the guys who we talked about at the beginning of this process as one of the top wide receivers, if not the top wide receiver coming out of Texas. How have things shifted as we see him here now at 69 on your big board?
Yeah, Haley, and this is strictly an on-the-field productivity rating, because if we're talking about the off-the-field stuff, some teams have him off the board. So he's probably going to end up going day 3, and Jack Bech is going to go in round 2, I think. So just for some clarification and context to this list, I was looking strictly at on the field. Isaiah Bond was hurt for much of last season. When he played, though, he's electric, and he was electric at Alabama as well. He was outplayed by Matthew Golden last season, in part because Matthew Golden was healthy, and Matthew Golden is almost certainly going to be a first-round pick. But the off-the-field stuff has followed Isaiah Bond, and that's a real concern. He left Alabama, and I know he wasn't on the best terms with the staff there. And then he went to Texas and had an opportunity to show what he could do on the field when he was healthy. But you wonder what his draft status is going to be day 3 or perhaps worse, given the off-the-field stuff he's going through. And as I mentioned, some teams won't be taking him no matter what. On the field, though, I had him going just inside the top 70. He
did have 540 receiving yards, I should say, and 5 receiving touchdowns at Texas. But you mentioned it. He did have some injury issues as well. So we will keep our eye on his path. We're almost done here, Ryan. I promise I'm going to let you go in just a few minutes. We got to jump ahead to 71 to 80. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, maybe not the first name that jumps out to you when you think about the Georgia Bulldogs, Ryan, but he's got good size for an edge rusher. And based on the defensive talent that we've seen come out of this program, what are the expectations for him in the draft and even beyond that?
I think me and producer Boney are the biggest Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins fans, because I think the only time I've talked about him is with producer Boney. But no one else is talking about him, to your point, Haley. And he was a lot of fun to watch. I think he was a Combine invite. I have to double check. But I remember going through and watching him and thinking, all right, why have we not talked about this young man yet? So I don't know if he goes this high. I'm particularly high on him, but I think the way he plays and the juice with which he plays and his ability to get off the ball, his ability to play the run, all those things stick out to me. And if he snuck into the back of day 2, that would be a fun story. I would feel good about it as well. But as you point out, this class is so deep at defensive line, you might be able to get him on day 3, and you're going to end up getting a steal, it feels like.
I want you to know that you got like a fist bump from producer Boney. I can see him through the glass here behind our camera. So you're making everyone's dreams come true here, Ryan, giving the producers a shout out. All right, let's wrap this up as we take a look at your board, 81 through 90. And we are going to take our conversation to the SEC. The wide receiver, Trey Harris, checking in at number 83 on your board. Now, Harris led all of FBS in receiving yards per game. How will that translate to the NFL?
That is the question, and I say that, Haley, because it's sometimes hard to figure out what these Ole Miss receivers look like in the NFL. Jonathan Mingo was a second-round pick a few years ago of the Carolina Panthers, and he was traded to the Cowboys, but it didn't quite work out. I think Harris is a better player, and this is a lot of what he does, contested catch and stacking defensive backs down the field. He didn't run the fastest time. He ran in the 4.5s, but he plays plenty fast. The only issue, and part of the reason I pushed him down fairly or not, is so hard to get a feel for how these Ole Miss receivers are going to translate. Quarterbacks, too, for that matter, for talking about Jackson Dart. But it's hard to argue with the production that he had. And the other thing I'll say, I'm glad I only sent producer Boney 100 names. If I sent 300 names, Haley, we'd be here till tomorrow, right before the draft, almost certainly.
Yeah, we don't have time to go through 300 names, Ryan, and you need to rest because you have a big day coming up tomorrow. The NFL Draft Round 1 to get underway in Green Bay, and we know that you will be on top of it. We certainly appreciate your time. Very busy this time of year, Ryan Wilson is. Here is the last look at the final 10 names on Ryan Wilson's big board. Of course, the NFL Draft getting underway tomorrow. From Green Bay, we expect Cam Ward to be the #1 pick, but we'll see how all of these guys fare as we move forward. If you need a quick refresher, make sure you tap into With the First Pick podcast with our Ryan Wilson. They've got so much information over the last week alone that will get you up to speed with the draft.